Hello, Henry.
There I am. Is that better?
How you doing today?
Great.
All right, great. Well, it's an honor to have the legendary drummer of crime on this broadcast of Suburban Rebels. So let's start with, how did you join crime?
Huh. Wow. Okay. Let's see. We're starting right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. How do I answer this question? Okay. The short answer is this. I saw Crime perform one of their first shows, just completely by accident. I was there to see another band at the Mabuhay Gardens. It was the first time I'd ever gone there.
Okay.
And it was before it became the West Coast mecca of punk rock, because punk rock didn't really exist as a term at that point. But I went to see a friend's band, and after they were done, Crime came on, and I thought they were one of the greatest bands I'd ever seen in my life. Now realize, I'd grown up in Cincinnati, Ohio, seeing on a regular basis from age 13 on bands like Iggy and the Stooges, the MC5, who regularly came through Cincinnati because they were from Ann Arbor and they were on a little circuit. Mm-hmm. So the music I heard in Crime took me back to that period of my life, and I was completely floored by this band. They came out and did a 20-minute set that just destroyed me. And when they went off the stage, the Dirk Dirksen, the manager of the club, said that Crime was looking for a new drummer. Mm-hmm. And I decided in that moment I was going to be that new drummer.
Oh, nice.
And I prepared. I cut my hair. I had long hair at that point. I cut it. I did a little photo montage of myself in different outfits and showing how I could fit in with this band. And I wrote a letter and I said, I'm not a drummer. I have played drums once or twice, but I'm not a drummer and I don't own any drums. Mm-hmm. But I'm convinced that I am the drummer for your band. And if you will give me a chance, I will get some drums and learn how to play them. And to make my application stand out, I covered the envelope in 1-cent stamps so that it would really pop. I later learned, of course, it was the only application they received. And I got a call from Johnny Strike, who said, based on what he had seen, that as far as he was concerned, I was in the band.
Awesome.
And that's how I joined.
Oh, great. That's a good story. Well, what like were your early drum influences when you started playing?
Oh, well, I was I was a huge fan of popular music from an early age. Even though I was on the young side, I was definitely swept up heavily into Beatlemania and everything that followed thereafter. I was a very early subscriber to Rolling Stone magazine back in the days when it was just a tabloid, and so I was well versed in popular music and loved all the first generation rock bands, the Stones and Hendrix and Cream and all that. I was immersed in that world. So those drummers, Mitch Mitchell and Ginger Baker, and these are the drummers who I had in my head when I picked up the sticks for the first time.
Oh, okay. Ginger Baker just died recently, I think.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
He did. A great loss.
Well, what were the early Crime shows like?
Well, when I joined the band, they were already a headlining band. Crime prided itself on never opening for other bands, always headlining. And it's the old start at the top theory.
That's pretty good.
And we always said, well, after I was in the group, we always said we would only ever open for two bands who we considered who we would be subservient to, and that was the Ramones and the Sex Pistols.
Oh, nice.
And we were offered an opening slot on the Sex Pistols show here at Winterland, which turned out to be their last public performance before Sid Vicious's death. But we turned it down because they offered us the third slot rather than the second slot.
Okay.
And we did open for the Ramones at a club, a now defunct club called the Old Waldorf.
Okay.
We did get a chance to do that, and that was definitely a career high.
Yeah. How was your interactions with the Ramones? Like, did anything happen with Dee Dee?
It was minimal. We had separate backstage areas, and they were cordial but distant.
Okay.
I would describe them. No great stories there.
Okay.
But early crime shows were known for their being very raucous and for people and for occasional violence. Thankfully, no one ever killed or badly hurt, but people would get very excited and start throwing tables and chairs around, and things would break, and I always loved looking at the room after the show was over and the place was cleared. It was a war zone.
Yeah. And how fun was San Francisco back in 1978?
San Francisco was fun then, and San Francisco is fun now. San Francisco has never not been fun, I think, dating back to the Barbary Coast days.
Yeah.
But it was a different time and a different tone to the city. But it was wide open, and it was anybody's game. However, punk rock was always the sort of ignored and disparaged movement that was going on in town. It was very difficult to get coverage in the mainstream press. The Chronicle kind of took a stance against punk rock, and the critics there as well. They turned their noses up at it. I mean, let's face it, their pockets were being lined by advertising from major corporations, record companies and whatnot, who were promoting the big acts, and so they were the ones who got the press. There wasn't much money behind the punk rock movement. That was kind of the point.
Right.
And there was a small underground that supported it. At one point, there was only one record store in town, Aquarius Records, now defunct and taken over by Stranded, which is opened in the same location on Valencia Street.
Right.
And Aquarius was the only store in town that would stock punk rock records.
Wow.
So it was and airplay on the radio was almost non-existent. So there was a lot of fear and skepticism about the bands identifying themselves as punk. And most importantly, Bill Graham came out and stated that no punk band would ever play one of his venues. And as Bill Graham had all the major music venues in town locked up, that pretty much sealed the fate of the punk movement in San Francisco.
In
fact, the Sex Pistols are the only punk band that ever played a Bill Graham venue up to that time.
Yep. Well, about the money, though, huh? Making money.
Yep. He knew they'd fill the place, and they did.
Yeah. Why'd you guys dress as cops and play San Quentin? Whose idea was that? Well,
the police uniforms predated the San Quentin show.
Right.
I think the genius behind that wardrobe decision was made by Johnny Strike, one of the two lead guitarists of the group. Crime was unique in that we had two frontmen who both played rhythm and both played lead. trading off on each other's songs, and they both sang. So we had this kind of strange democracy going on within the band. But the cop uniforms the idea was to create a kind of cognitive dissonance, to have a band named Crime. The band dresses like police, but we didn't just dress in normal police uniforms. We altered them in various ways. We would sort of criminalize them up by turning up collars or altering the uniform in some subtle way. But I can tell you, when we would walk down the street together, we were often mistaken for police. Of course, the dark sunglasses were very important.
Yeah.
And trying to look as menacing as possible.
Did you guys ever mess with anyone dressed as police? Like,
no, we didn't do it. We didn't do it for recreational purposes, but we were actually brought into a performance art piece by a performance artist, and the piece was called "Crime in the Streets," and it was held in the alley next to City Lights Books in North Beach.
Oh, wow,
and
cool.
It involved all kinds of strange activities. I remember someone was carried in on a 4-poster bed by people, and then we were there playing police, pretending to bludgeon people and hold the crowd back. And it was all part of the performance. So that's the only time we interacted as police with members of the public.
Cool. How did the inmates take that San Quentin show? Did they get like all wild and stuff, or?
Well, when we had an opportunity to perform at San Quentin Prison, we jumped at the chance. It just seemed too perfect. So we were performing out in the exercise yard, and there were a number of bands on the program that day, and and we were of course the only punk band. Others were, I believe there was some kind of a funk or soul band, and there were, and I don't remember who the other bands were, but they were different genres of music. So the yard was filled with prisoners and or inmates, I guess we'd call them, or either. And traditionally, I had been told that when a band, an African American band, would play, that all the African American inmates would come up to the front as close to the stage as they could get and listen. And all the non-African American inmates would stand up and walk to the farthest point away at the other end of the yard. And conversely, when a band of another ethnicity would play, that ethnicity would support them, and all the others would separate and scatter. Well, I like to say that when we came on, everybody got up and left. But what happened was we brought with us some of our, at the time, girlfriends, and they were dressed smartly and were dancing in front of the stage, and it was the girls who brought everybody back.
Yeah.
So we had a good crowd there, and there was a kind of demilitarized zone between the front of the stage and where the inmates were allowed to be, and that area was sort of a gravel area, maybe about 8-10 feet wide. The girls were dancing in that area, and the inmates were picking up pebbles and flicking them, trying to bounce them off of the girls' asses. And that provided a lot of entertainment during the show.
Who were you closest with in the band, would you say?
Without question, Johnny Strike and I were very simpatico, and we did. Pardon me. We did most of the heavy lifting in terms of the management and direction and activities of the band. Frankie Fix, the other front man, brilliant performer and quite a guy, was not a very reliable person. It was difficult being in a band with him. And Ron the Ripper Greco, who was a veteran, by far the most accomplished musician and longtime band member of all of us. He had been in bands going back into the mid '60s. He was had a very professional attitude towards being in the band, so that was great. He also was the one who sort of taught me how to play drums, not to play them, but just how to set them up. He was with me when I had to go and buy my first set of drums, and he helped me pick them out, and because he had been a drummer at some point in his earlier life, and he's still performing.
Oh, nice. Did you guys ever play with Blondie?
The Crime played with Blondie. That was just before I joined the band.
Oh, okay.
That was one of their earliest shows.
Okay, yeah. That's because I saw pictures, Crime with Debbie Harry, so that's what I was wondering.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What can you tell me about Mabuhay Gardens nightclub on Broadway that stands out in your mind, like the craziest thing you think you saw there?
Craziest thing? Well, a lot of crazy things there. The bathrooms were quite entertaining on nights with shows. All kinds of things going on in there. Well, this is kind of a horrible story, but the dressing room, the stage is very small. This is a Filipino supper club. This wasn't meant to be a punk rock nightclub. Mm-hmm. So in the early part of the evening, it was filled with Filipino families having traditional Filipino food, and the decor was sort of like a thatched hut, village jungle look, and the furniture was rattan, and it was very sort of exotic looking. Right. And the stage was small, and the backstage area was even smaller, and it was a tiny little staircase to a little room at the sort of on a mezzanine. Of course, there was no bathroom up there, and Frankie always liked to take a piss before he went on stage. But with no bathroom facilities up there, he just opened the door into a supply closet and just urinated into the closet. Of course, this closet was directly over the bar downstairs, and the bartenders would come screaming up the stairs because the urine was dripping down the bar and the bartenders, and it's a disgusting story, but it happened.
Wow, what drugs were rampant of choice back then? I saw like a lot of like coke being done in the new movie.
Yes, coke was around, but the drug of that era that I think really defined the punk rock era were Quaaludes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Quaaludes were, to my mind, the perfect drug. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure, but Quaalude is not a big commitment. It's kind of the sensation you get is kind of the sensation that you go after when you drink alcohol. Mm-hmm. You've got a buzz, you're social, you're animated, everything is good. Mm-hmm. It's the best point of alcohol. Mm-hmm. That's what Quaaludes, they took you there instantly, and they held you there. Mm-hmm. And it was a drug where you could just be out for an evening and have a great time and not be too fucked up. Mm-hmm. And there was no hangover the next morning. Mm-hmm. So they were the perfect drug. And as a result, they were the most abused drug in the history of drugs. Mm-hmm. They were too good. Yeah. And if you were lucky enough to get pharmaceutical ones, then you were guaranteed purity. but there were many black market versions of the drug on the street, all of which were good. And then it was made illegal because it was being too widely abused, and with good reason. And
Did it have
the components that are used to make it up are they've somehow restricted one of the key ingredients so that there's no longer a black market in Quaaludes that I'm aware of. I have not heard of or seen a Quaalude in probably more than 3 decades.
Yeah, I was going to say, do people still make those or take them? I don't know.
I did see it. I did see an episode of what is it called? Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, talking about the market for illegal Quaaludes in Africa, and they're being made there with ingredients that are being shipped in from China, and they're allowing the Africans to make them in exchange for abalone and other illegally farmed sea life that is important to the Chinese.
Interesting. How did the Quaaludes affect the band, do you think?
Well, the Quaaludes had I think a positive effect on the band. They were they didn't impede productivity. It was heroin that came into the band that ultimately led to my departure, and then subsequently the demise of the band. And that was a very bad thing when Frankie and then Johnny began using it. The writing was on the wall for me. Yeah. I kept telling them, no, we have to make it first, and then you can develop your heroin habits. Right. If you do it the other way around, we're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
But my words fell on deaf ears.
So it was hard to be in a band with Frankie Fix, like you said.
I'm sorry, you broke up on me there. What was that?
I said it was hard to be being in the band with Frankie Fix because of that.
Well, yes. At that point, it became impossible. He was not showing up for rehearsals. He was unreliable on stage, and you can't have a band like that.
Right. Yeah. How many of your friends overdosed from those days?
A lot. There was a high mortality rate among the early punks in San Francisco. Yeah. It was a regular occurrence.
Right.
And thankfully, I never entered the dark realm of the evil drugs.
Right.
And that's why I'm here to tell the story.
Yeah.
Crime lost. The first Crime drummer was lost to an overdose. That's Ricky Tractor, who went on to found the Sleepers after Crime, but died soon thereafter. And Britley Black, the drummer who I saw at the first Crime show, who I replaced, also died of an overdose some years later. So Crime had a high mortality rate. And then Frankie died of drug-related issues years later.
It's a blessing you're here, man.
And Johnny just died earlier this year.
Right.
Or actually about a year ago. And that was a huge loss. Yeah. So only Ripper and I remain. And then there's Joey Swales, who was a short-time member of the band. Came in first as a bass player when Ripper had to leave for a period, and then when Ripper came back, he switched to synthesizer during the band's final days.
Okay. And you guys claimed you were San Francisco's first and only rock and roll band. Was that statement saying there was no other real rock and roll bands after you?
Well, we couldn't speak to the future. We could only talk about the past and the present. So our claim of being San Francisco's first and only rock and roll band had several intentions behind it. First of all, that kind of hyperbolic bravado is funny and eye-catching. The other is that we always shunned the name of punk. So we didn't consider ourselves a punk band. Certainly not in the sense of spiky hair and safety pins in the cheek. We never did that. We always considered ourselves not a rock band, but a rock and roll band, which is a nod to the early days, the people that we loved the most. You know, Elvis, Carl Perkins, and the early rock and roll. We saw ourselves much more of a descendant of that than anything to do with the emerging punk movement. We got swept up into it. Crime predated, as I said, punk rock as a term and a concept. But when it emerged, we were in the mainstream of that, and helped to define it, even though we didn't consider ourselves a part of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Why was San Francisco doomed?
Well, San Francisco's always been doomed. I mean, we're just an earthquake away from falling into the ocean.
Yeah.
And we sit on a precipice, and a dangerous one at that. So whether it's going to come from natural or unnatural or man-made causes, San Francisco, like everywhere, is doomed. We were just the first to say it.
What went to making the new film, or the new film with old footage? Who had all that footage locked away?
Actually, I had it all these years. This film, which we call San Francisco's first and only rock and roll movie, Crime, 1978, is a real it's a real discovery, because this period, because there wasn't a tremendous amount of attention focused on the punk rock movement, there was very little documentation. There were only a handful of photographers who were documenting the movement, and filmmakers were not present. However, the emergence of Crime coincided with the first affordable consumer or prosumer video cameras. We're talking about Sony Portapaks that used reel-to-reel tape that could only shoot black and white, that were very fuzzy by today's standards, and you could only fit, I think, about 15 or 20 minutes onto a tape. So they were very cumbersome, big things too. You had a giant camera, and then it was connected by a big thick cable to a recording unit that weighed about 25 pounds, that you'd have to hang off your shoulder. So it was very cumbersome. And there was really only one videographer in town who had one of these and who was interested in the punk movement, and that was Joe Reese, who founded an organization called Target Video. And he went in and he taped a lot of the early bands at the Mabuhay. However, at that point, I had produced one of the first cable television shows in San Francisco, the dawn of San Francisco cable television, which at that time was controlled by Viacom. And during that production, I met one of the station managers, and we became friends. And as I told him, as he realized that I had joined this band and was part of this movement, he decided he would like to try to make a film about the burgeoning punk rock movement in San Francisco. And because he knew me, I was his entry point, and he started with Crime. So he didn't shoot early generation video. He shot actual 16 millimeter film. And we worked on it together to create to document a live show at the Mabuhay, which we did with 5 cameras covering it.
Mm-hmm.
So this footage, after it was shot, it was supposed to be part of a whole series of bands and then put together into a film project he wanted to title Punk Is ... And it would have been, if he had completed it, the first movie about punk rock. But after filming Crime, I guess he ran out of money, and nothing was done with the footage, and so it sat. And Larry took sick. He developed a terrible, debilitating disease that eventually turned him into a paraplegic before his death. And he gave me all the footage and said, "Here, if you can ever do anything with this, be my guest." So I've been sitting on it all these years, and as people approach me over the years about crime projects, I would always mention it, and I would say, I've got this footage that needs to be turned into something. But and I waited for somebody to pay me to do it, but nobody ever stepped up. So the footage sat there. And finally, a friend and colleague of mine, John Bastian, when he heard about this footage, he begged me to let him edit it. He said, "Please let me get at it." And I, out of exhaustion, said, "Okay, sure, let's do it." So we began to, we transferred the footage, of course, for video editing purposes, and began the arduous task of syncing the sound and working on the sound. We were very lucky. In addition to the beautiful color 16 millimeter film, the recording of the performance was excellent. It was a 2-channel recording. One channel was taken off of the board, the mixing board. It was very clean, and you can hear every instrument clearly. It's well mixed. And the other was a microphone in the room that picked up all the crowd and ambient sound. By mixing those two skillfully together and using the miracle of modern sound software, we were able to create a surround, a 5.1 surround mix out of those 2 tracks. And it's an extraordinarily immersive experience if you're able to hear it in a theater or in a good home theater situation. You got to see the film, yes?
Yeah, it sounds and looks amazing.
Well, what ended up resulting, as soon as it began to come together, was I quickly realized that this is by far the best recorded, best filmed, and best recorded performance by any band of that early period at the Mabuhay Gardens. Now, the only other film that really is out there is one that's been out there for a long time. It's a film called Louder, Faster, Shorter by Mindy Bagdon. And that chronicled, I think, 5 or 6 of the bands of that era, not including Crime, who did not participate in that film. But that film, though shot on film, was black and white, very grainy, poorly lit, and but still, it's a great document of the time. But in terms of quality and the immersive quality of the film, I don't think anything can compare to this new one.
Yeah, it's great. I loved it.
Thank you.
What about when you drummed and you had strippers on stage? Wasn't that distracting?
Oh, not to me. Mabuhay Gardens was on Broadway, and at that time there were even more strip clubs on Broadway than there are now. There's just a few left, but there was one right across the street from the Mabuhay that we would hang out in. It's not there anymore, but they had a swing, like a porch swing, mounted on the side of the stage, where if you were a VIP, they would let you sit up in this swing, and you're basically right on the stage next to where the the action is going on.
Mm.
And we used to go over there and hang out. If there was a band on stage we didn't care about seeing, we would just go over and hang out over there. So we became friends with a lot of the strippers, and we just got the idea once of, hey, why don't you come over on your next break and dance during our set? And they did. It was great. We put them in crime hats or stuck some piece of crime on them, and then they just danced. That was a very spur of the moment notion.
You guys were probably the first band to do that.
Oh,
now that I think about it, you know.
Trying to think. You know, that could be true. I don't know. I've never made that claim, but I'll have to research that.
Because I've seen the Stranglers from England do it, and maybe the Dead Boys, and some other bands. So you guys are probably the first, now that I think about it.
We could have been.
Yeah.
How
often did you guys play?
Well, because we didn't do a lot of touring, we toured Southern California a couple times, and then we did a Pacific Northwest tour once. Okay. Beyond that, we never got off the West Coast. So we were always very conscious about not burning out our audiences. So crime shows were events. We wanted them to be events. And so we held back from playing a lot. And so we might only play once a month or something like that on average. There were not a huge number of crime shows.
Yeah. Did you guys make a decent amount of money then, or everyone had a day job?
No, we did not. As people are fond of saying, crime does not pay. It certainly didn't then. Running and maintaining a band that plays so little, and you have to understand even on a Friday or Saturday night, the entrance to the Mabuhay was like $4 or $5, maybe $6 if you were lucky.
Right.
And the capacity of the club, a couple hundred people. So there wasn't a lot of money involved.
Yeah.
And if you're having to pay roadies and maintain equipment, and it certainly does not provide a living wage.
Right.
Now, crime holds the distinction of being the first punk band on the West Coast, and they can make claim to that because they released the first independent record of any band.
Right.
And that was Baby You're So Repulsive and Murder by that was the second single. Why am I drawing a blank on the first single? Anyway, this single is highly coveted and very valuable if you can find an original pressing. It's been repressed several times, and even the repressings have some value, but the song is now available digitally, so it's destroyed the collector's market. But that release of the first single was a landmark event.
Yeah. What were the most exciting bands to play with at the time, you think?
Well, understand that the bands who later went on to greater fame, like the Dead Kennedys, the Avengers, these are all bands that started out opening for crime.
Right.
And so all the bands clamored to get onto crime shows because they knew those shows would be packed. So it was a great showcase for them. Yeah. And those bands all emerged out of that.
Right.
They went on to greater acclaim and longer careers because they weren't plagued with some of the problems that we were.
Right. I was going to
say we were our own worst enemy. We were a very self-destructive band.
Yeah. How did it feel to influence people like Penelope and Jello?
Well, it was a beautiful, softer, gentler time, I'd like to call it. there was a lot of interaction among bands, and it was great to see these people. You know, Penelope came out of art school and formed a band with some of her classmates. So people were coming from different disciplines and bringing that into the world that eventually coalesced around this word punk. But you know from listening to bands of that era, there's a lot of different styles. It's hard to put you know, the Talking Heads and the Sex Pistols in the same category, and yet they were both considered punk bands. Crazy.
That's true. Yeah. You said there was violence at crime shows. What do you think the worst you saw was?
Well, there was a window, the front plate glass window in the front of the club was smashed during a crime show, and we were very proud when that happened. Yeah. We didn't consider it a good show unless something got broken.
Was the audience as strange as they looked in the movie?
They were just that strange or stranger. The movies, it takes me back instantly to that time, and those people are sort of etched in my mind as they're frozen there in time.
Yeah.
But yes, what's clear from the film is you get a real sense of what the crowd was about. And as this was a time before punk fashion was identified and codified, you see a real hodgepodge of people who attended. You see disco chicks and hippies and greasers, and you know, nobody really knew. There wasn't one kind of way to dress or wear your hair. So there's just a huge range of people and ethnicities and sexualities. There were gays and straights together. There were transvestites and, you know, all different manner of people who all came together for this sort of outsider musical experience, and each brought something to it and took something from it. So that's what you see very clearly in the film, is how undefined the audience was.
Do you know where most of the people in the film are now, or?
I don't know where most of them are, but I do know where some of them are. Let's see, all of the band's girlfriends appear in the film at some point or another, so they're interspersed throughout the crowd and around the room. A lot of the people in the audience were members of other bands. There are members of the Nuns in the audience, and other bands from that era. So, you know, I know some of the people. Of course, Bruce Conner, who was a great artist and who spent a lot of time involved with the punk scene there, documenting it on 35 millimeter still film, and created a whole body of work that's been widely exhibited, including at SF MoMA a few years ago. He was there and is in the film, but he died about 5 years ago. And not too many of those people left. I know that Bambi Lake appears in the film, and she's still performing. So she's still around, living here in the Tenderloin somewhere, performing from time to time.
Nice. How often was the stage invaded by audience members? Like a scene in the movie, like the one girl jumps on stage?
Oh, yeah. Well, that happened. The stage was very low at the Mabuhay, just a step up. So it wasn't hard for people to get on stage if they felt inspired. The show that's depicted in the film predates the practice known as stage diving that we know today so well. That really hadn't been invented yet. So, and the Mabuhay stage, only being about 18 inches off the ground, would not have been the greatest launch pad for a stage dive.
What about the footage where the girl's like about to like blow some guy? Was that at the show? Like it looks
no. Okay, so you're referring to one of the projection images that we used on stage. So I had because I'd had a background in film and then television production. I got the idea of doing some projection. Now the Mabuhay wasn't set up for that. There was no screen and there was no projector, and it was a very low ceiling, so it didn't lend itself to that. But I thought it would be a cool thing to do, at least for one song. So for our big hit, "Baby You're So Repulsive," I had found in North Beach at one of the adult stores there. I found a Super 8 film called Son of Quasimodo. It's a monster porn film featuring the Hunchback of Notre Dame in a pornographic film. So I always loved monsters and freaks as a kid. That's my whole background. And so I got this film, and I re-edited it to fit the length of our song, and then we set up a projector and a screen on stage and projected this little monster porn story while we performed "Baby You're So Repulsive." And the images that we pulled from that for this film came directly from that footage.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
So
that's cool.
That was happening on stage, but projected.
Okay. And where'd you guys practice?
Mostly, for years, we had a practice space in a little practice studio on Natoma Street in the south of Market called Time and Space.
Okay.
And whatever happened to it, I have no idea. Long gone.
Okay.
But we would store our equipment there, so we could just pull it out of a storage bin and set up and play. And made some recordings there of rehearsals that eventually were released on records years later.
Okay.
But that's where we rehearsed.
Did you hang out with like Ron the Ripper or any of the guys outside of playing gigs? Did you guys go hang out?
Oh yeah, we hung out together quite a bit. We like to be seen together. We like to go out as a band and go places together. Okay. That was neat and fun, and brought us publicity. It got us a mention in Herb Cain, who was the big local gossip columnist at the time. We were in Herb Cain several times from having been spotted on the out somewhere, all dressed up in our uniforms and badges.
Oh, okay.
And we also were featured, got a mention in Armistead Maupin's Tales of the City. I don't know. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Armistead Maupin is an author who created this serialized fictional story called Tales of the City. And it was about life in San Francisco during that time. And he created all these characters, many of whom were based on people he knew, who were gay and straight, and really capturing the zeitgeist of the city during that time. Okay. And the cool thing was that it was serialized in the Chronicle every day, and people read that like fiends. People couldn't wait for the next installment. It was like a soap opera. And the scenes would take place at different places around the city that were real places. So he had fictional characters in real places. One of the scenes, one of his characters went to the Mabuhay Gardens, and crime was on stage. So he was researching all of this stuff while he was writing it. Eventually, all of these daily entries were compiled into a book. The book has been made into a film. The film was made into a TV series. It's spawned a sequel. It's a very successful and well-known piece of literature that's spawned all these other incarnations.
Oh, very cool. Do you think the band achieved their goal in race consciousness?
Definitely. And you're referring to Johnny's line in the movie about our goal is to raise RAZE consciousness.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. We liked to stress our audiences as much as we could. We would often delay coming on stage until the last possible minute. This, of course, is the ugliest time in the evening at a punk rock club. That's where everybody's drugs are starting to turn and their alcohol level is high, and everybody's starting to get pissed off. And we liked our audiences pissed off when we hit the stage, and we liked to leave them that way when we left. We would often play just 20-minute sets that we would go out there and run through 10 songs in 20 minutes, and then boom, we're off. And we would refuse to do encores, and that drove people crazy, and they would just tear up the place. We loved that.
And do you still have the original Crime drum set?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a Ludwig stainless steel set, a highly coveted drum set from the 70s. It was, I think, the first stainless steel set that was done commercially. I got that because I went to the music store, which at that time was Don Weir's Music City. This predated the existence of Guitar Center. And that was the place where you went to get rock instruments. I walked in, I went to the drum department. They said, "What kind of drums do you want?" I said, "Well, I just joined the loudest band in the city. I guess I want the loudest drums." So they said, "Well, that would be these stainless steel drums." I said, "Okay, set me up." And yes, I still have them and maintain them. And my son George, who owns and operates a recording studio, uses them for, I've made them available to him to use for certain bands that want that sound when they come in. So
nice.
The Crime drum set is still very much in use today.
Nice. Do you still believe your message is too big for one person?
Absolutely. Crime was a concept that just keeps on giving. I can't tell you what the impact that the band has had on the world in strange ways. I think Crime is better known today than we ever were back when we were actually together. The internet has helped to spread our message and our fame. But in the year 2005, we were contacted about doing a reunion and headlining a 3-day punk rock festival in Rome. And we put the band back together with some new members, of course, to replace those who had deceased. And we went to Rome to play the show. And I was amazed to find there the promoter who hired us took us in his car one day and drove us up to a shop. And I looked at the store window, and everything in it was Crime merchandise. Crime merchandise I had never seen before.
Wow.
Walked into the store. It turned out not only was it the display in the window, but the entire shop was filled with nothing but Crime merchandise. I'm talking T-shirts and records and stickers and buttons and every conceivable object you can think of branded with the Crime logo. I was flabbergasted, and I thought, oh, well, is this like a pop-up shop that's here because we're in town and we're headlining this festival? Oh, no. This is a shop that's here every day.
Wow. That's
so
cool.
we had impact around the world in ways that we were completely unaware of.
Wow.
Japan, to this day, has altars to Crime in various locations.
Wow.
My daughter and my son are on tour in Japan right now with their band, Everglades. And everywhere they go, people are showing up in Crime T-shirts, in Crime. There's posters, original posters hanging on the walls in bars. It's unbelievable.
Oh, that's cool. Very cool.
We're also going to be unveiling the newest and, to my mind, greatest piece of Crime merchandise ever created at the upcoming show. We haven't even talked about the upcoming show.
No, we haven't. So where can people see this awesome movie? It's a big part of San Francisco punk rock history.
Well, we are having the world premiere of the finished film at the Victoria Theater on Thursday, November 14th at 7 p.m.
Okay.
The event is called Cops versus Aliens, and it can be looked up either on Facebook or Eventbrite. And tickets should be purchased quickly because they're going to sell out. We're also pairing this evening, the crime film, which is not feature length, I should add. It's we made the most out of the footage that we had and created a 35-minute film that perfectly embodies the performance and the extra material that we had, including some of the San Quentin footage that's cut in very cleverly, I think, don't you?
Yeah, I thought it went great.
How it all synchronizes together.
Yeah, that looked
that
great.
was not easy to do.
I bet.
But yes, and we're going to have there's going to be not only the crime movie, but we're going to be having a rare screening of the David Bowie Ziggy Stardust film by D.A. Pennebecker. We have permission from the Pennebecker family to screen the film on a 16-millimeter print, which will be just beautiful. And we're going to have a Ziggy lookalike contest that evening, and we already have a bunch of entries. We're also going to be graced by a rare live performance by the legendary Stardust Cowboy, an amazing performer who David Bowie borrowed the name Stardust from to create his character, Ziggy Stardust.
Oh, cool.
And was a huge fan. Bowie was a huge fan of the Cowboy. And he will be performing live with his band, which includes Klaus Floride, bassist of the Dead Kennedys.
Oh,
so
nice.
There's going to be other punk rock royalty there.
Cool.
Also, Ron the Ripper is going to be doing a couple solo acoustic songs before the movie. So we're excited. It's going to be a super fun evening and one not to miss.
All right. Sounds great. And any last words?
Last words? I want to see everybody there. We've got last words. Here's this. The same day that the movie is being screened, we will be releasing the vinyl soundtrack and DVD of the film. They are being produced by Superior Viaduct Records, and will be available in an exclusive edition only at the show. So, or for the first time at the show. So it's a fantastic package, and we're really proud to finally have this work finished and in a form where it can take its place in punk rock history.
Great. Well, can't wait for that.
All right.
Well, thanks for taking the time to do this interview.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It was great meeting you the other night.
Of course.
And hope to run into you again soon at another show.
Of course. Thanks for your time, Henry.
You got it. All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
day.